What's happening today? My name is goukigod, and in this video I want to talk about Titanfall because I've just played the the technical test, whatever you want to call it, and I thought I'd share my impressions on the game because it's something that I've been looking forward to quite a fair bit since the original dropped almost 2 years ago. And the original Titanfall was a game that I enjoyed immensely. Now, I played the original on the original 360, so the version that I played was probably the worst version that you could play of the game, but Bluepoint did a pretty good job with the port onto 360. So I was really looking forward to playing it on PS4, obviously for the update in the graphics, but also in the frame rate. And also I was really looking forward to see what Respawn had done with the sequel, considering that the original was pretty much universally panned for not having enough content. Now, as usual with most other betas or tests or alphas or early access to games, I had massive issues. The issue this time was that the Sydney servers weren't working, so I spent probably about an hour in total trying to get onto a game. Now, I know this is a technical test, but to a certain degree, it's also a marketing opportunity. So I think for a fair few Australians and also New Zealanders, this would have left quite a sour taste in the mouth. Certainly not a good first impression. Now, this technical test will run over 2 weekends. I've only played over the first weekend so far, so this is not including all the modes that have been available and not all the bits and pieces. I believe there's a few new weapons and there's a new map, and there could be another mode as far as I know in the second part of the test. I'm not exactly sure. But basically, this test only had a small portion of the game and not the entire thing. There also hasn't been a PC test of the game because Respawn were worried about people data mining and finding out things that they shouldn't and, leaking information and providing spoilers before the game leaks. And I can understand that. That's pretty disappointing for PC players, but there must be some pretty exciting stuff and some things that they don't want spoiled before release, so you got to respect that. Now, in this test, there were 3 modes. There was a mode called Bounty Hunt, there was Amped Hardpoint, and there was Pilot versus Pilot. Now, Hardpoint and Pilot versus Pilot are pretty self-explanatory. Hardpoint is kind of like domination, and Pilot versus Pilot is basically a mode without Titans, which didn't make a great deal of sense to me because the whole point of Titanfall is to have Titans falling from the sky. Maybe that's just me. And the third mode was Bounty Hunt, which is a brand new mode, which I didn't really think was all that great, but I'll get into that in a moment. Now, I thought that it was kind of odd that attrition wasn't part of the test. I mean, I get that they're trying to push the new modes to showcase the new variety that they've added, but it's kind of hard to get a proper feel for the game without one of the main attractions. Maybe they felt that if attrition was available, no one would try the new content, but personally I think that that's a risk worth taking. Now, in Titanfall 2, you have different types of pilots. There were 5 pilots available in this test. There were 3 available from the start, and there were 2 additional ones that needed unlocking. Now, each of these pilots has a special ability. Some of these abilities were returning ones from the original game, such as the Cloak and Stim, while others, like the Grapple, were completely new. I've played around with 4 out of the 5 so far. I haven't played around with Cloak because you needed to unlock it with 500 credits, which is quite a large amount of credits, which you would have to save up and not spend on weapons and other bits and pieces of cool tech, so that's why I didn't do that. I did unlock Stim because it was only 60 or 65 credits, and that's the one that basically allows you to be super fast for a short period of time. Stim was definitely my favorite. I think that's because it suits my playstyle. I like to be fast, I like to kind of rush around. So obviously being able to move around the map super quickly for very short periods of time sort of falls directly in line with the way that I like to play, and it's perfect for rushing objectives and getting out of trouble quickly. I also like the Grapple quite a lot as well. I actually found that the Grapple had quite a steep learning curve initially, and I didn't like it to start with, but once you got the hang of it, it can be used in quite a few different ways. It can be used to traverse the map much faster, or it can be used offensively to rodeo enemy Titans, or it can even be used offensively to take down enemy players. Now, there were 2 types of Titan in this test. There was the Ion and Scorch, and I like that the Titans are also unique like the pilots are, that they have different abilities and different weapons. They also play very differently, and I think this adds a nice extra layer of strategy to each game, because there are obvious counterpicks and certain situations where some Titans are better than others. I do miss how you can choose your primary weapon though from the original game, and maybe that will be something that's available in the full release, but in the technical test you were tied down to 1 primary weapon per Titan. There were 3 maps that were available in the first weekend of the test, and I think there's an additional map coming in the second weekend. And these maps are pretty different to the original game. They're quite open, there's not a huge amount of buildings and whatnot, and it does give the game a very different look and feel. And I think that visually the game is an improvement over the original, but not by miles. And you've got to remember that I was coming from the Xbox 360 version, so obviously I'm going to think anything looks better. I mean, don't get me wrong, Titanfall 2 is a good looking game, it's just not a technical show pony, and it's probably not pushing the hardware like some other titles are. But having said that, it is a very solid game. I didn't notice any dips in the frame rate, there was no obvious screen tearing, and overall it looked like it was running at a decent resolution. So from a graphic fidelity standpoint, the game is pretty solid, but I did still have a few issues with the presentation, and that was mainly to do with the design and the layout. So for example, I felt that the head-up display was pretty damn confusing. When you're playing a game and depending on the mode, there's so many icons all over the screen and they all seem to be a very similar size, so it's kind of hard to know where the key pieces of information are. So for example, in the bounty hunt mode, there's a bank that you have to go to deposit credits, and the icon for this is really small, and sometimes the bank can be on the other side of the map. So having a clear marker to help you get there is really important, and half the time I was fighting to see it through all the other messages and icons on the screen. I also thought that the lobby was pretty poorly designed as well. The top half is pretty straightforward, but the bottom half displays all the names of the players in the networks that you're associated with. And depending on how many networks you're in, this can be quite a few names, and the problem with this is once you get down and stuck into that, you have to kind of go through the whole list and then back out again to get back to the main menu. I found that I pressed down one too many times in this lobby and then got stuck on these network names more than a few times. Now, to explain what the networks are, they're kind of confusing and they're not very well explained in the game, and outside of earning extra credits during their happy hour times, their purpose really isn't clearly defined. But basically they work just like clans. You join up and you can play with other people, and it's designed to help you group up and squad up more easily. So for that reason, I don't really understand why they're called networks. I think they should have just been called clans or squads or teams or something that was just a little bit more obvious. Now in terms of the gameplay, I felt that Titanfall 2 plays pretty much exactly the same as the original Titanfall. Yes, there's new mechanics and abilities and things that you can do which are different from the original, but the core mechanics and the way that the game feels does feel very much like the original. Titanfall 2 just has a lot more variety. So more weapons, more ways that you can customize your character, more ways that you can set up your Titan, and so on. Now this not being the full game, we didn't have access to every single weapon, and we still don't know what all the weapons will be, but the weapons that were available were quite diverse and quite fun to use. Although I did find that most people seem to gravitate towards the R201, which is the assault rifle, which I think is in the same family, or maybe it's the big brother of the R101, which was the assault rifle from the original game, which was arguably the most popular weapon from that game. The new anti-Titan weapons that featured in the test were pretty cool. The big one, which I can't remember the name of, that takes up pretty much half the screen, is very satisfying to use, particularly when you take down a Titan with it. And it's obvious that they've spent a little bit more time developing these weapons and trying to make them a little bit more exciting than the original. In terms of the modes that were available in this test, I found that most of them had a bit of a learning curve before you could figure out what was going on and start doing well in them, particularly the bounty hunt mode. It actually took me about half an hour to figure out what you had to do and how to successfully win the game. And unfortunately, in most of the games that I played, I don't think many other people figured out what you were supposed to do, because I was topping the scoreboards despite not getting the most kills. And on top of this, there's a lot of new mechanics which are also quite confusing or have a bit of a learning curve before you understand how they work. So an example of this would be the Titan batteries, which is quite a confusing thing to get your mind around, because now you can rip batteries out of Titans and you can rip them out of enemy Titans, and then you can jam them in friendly Titans to help your team out. But if you die, you drop them and then they leave an icon on the map and you can pick them up, and it's very confusing, and I found that most players were kind of ignoring the whole battery situation. I certainly think a tutorial would go a long way to explaining the mechanics and how to maximize their usage and why they're important, but perhaps that'll come in the story mode or some kind of additional training mode within the main game. So let's talk about the modes in a little bit more detail. Like I said, there were 3 modes: Hardpoint, Bounty Hunt, and Pilot versus Pilot. Hardpoint was pretty much like domination, where you had to capture these points, but you could double capture them, which I didn't really understand. I think it made them harder to recapture for the other team. And this was quite a fun mode, although a little bit slower paced than I would like, but the maps that we got to play on were designed well for this type of mode. Pilot versus Pilot is pretty much like it sounds. It's 8v8 pilot madness. And it is probably one of the fastest game modes, and it is fun, but I don't really see the point, like I said, if there's no Titans in it. Playing Titanfall like this just feels like any kind of generic sci-fi first-person shooter. I get that a lot of the community were asking for it, and that's probably why they put it in the game, but it's certainly not my cup of tea. Bounty Hunt was the 3rd mode, and it's definitely not a mode that I think works well with the Titanfall gameplay style. To explain it in a nutshell, basically you have two sides, two different teams that have to take out waves of enemy AI. So I guess it's kind of like a survival mode, except the AI isn't all that difficult. It's more like farming the AI. And when you kill the AI or members of the enemy team, you get money. And once you've collected a decent amount of money, you have to take your money back to a bank and deposit it. And the team with the largest amount of money at the end of the game wins. Now the catch is, if you die, you lose a decent amount of your cash. In some situations, I seem to lose about half the cash that I was holding. And it seems as though that the situations in which you die will depend on how much cash you lose. So I think if a pilot takes you out, if they manage to melee kill you or something like that, it may lose you more cash than just being shot by a grunt or something like that. I'm not exactly sure, but I think that's how it works. Ultimately, I think it's a good idea. I just didn't think that it played all that well, and it's a little bit confusing. I think I mentioned earlier on about the bank system, that you have to kind of travel halfway across the map to deposit your cash into this bank, and the icon is a little bit hard to see. And both teams seem to deposit into the same bank, and the bank shuts down between waves, and yeah, it's a bit of a mess. Like I said, it took me ages to figure out how to maximize this mode and how to do well at it. And even when I did, I didn't really find it all that fun. And it wasn't particularly challenging either. The AI that you have to kill just deploy and just kind of stand around like cows and you just mow them down. So I don't know. I guess there's a decent amount of strategy to this mode, but it wasn't for me. But I'm certainly going to give the second part of the test a go. I'm keen to give the game a little bit more time to see if my initial impressions of it weren't exactly correct. I mean, I loved the original game so much, and I had such high hopes for the sequel, and it feels like Respawn have delivered everything that the community asked for. There's definitely more content, there's definitely more variety. It looks like there's going to be a huge amount of customization in terms of the way that you can set up your pilot and also your Titan. So I think even after the technical test is over, I still probably won't have a 100% clear idea of whether this is going to be something that I'm going to pick up or not. So it may sound like I'm being super critical of the game, but I guess that I'm trying to get an understanding of how good the game is going to be when it launches. But anyway, I'm getting way off topic and talking speculation and all kinds of crazy ideas. Like I said, I'll be keeping a close eye on it. I'll be playing the second part of the test. Let me know if you've got involved so far and what your thoughts are, and if you're looking forward to the second part of the test. If you're sold on the idea of Titanfall 2 and you're going to pick it up for sure, or if you're not liking it, drop all your thoughts in the comment section below. But that's all I've got for you in this video. I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm out.